All right, so when I first showed up, I was trying to think like what I needed to talk about, and then I had spoken with this kind of gentleman in the front, and so I asked him like, what do the people want to hear from me? And he said, basically to share my wisdom of my experience, and that's I feel I'm at a bit of a disadvantage because I find that my wisdom probably isn't very valuable here. There's so many different. What I've found is when I come to these conferences, there's so many different experiences that many people are usually more qualified than I am when I talk. So I will see what I can do to add some experience. So if you don't mind, I'm gonna go in the spirit of EQ. I'm gonna do a quick exercise for everybody. I study what I call organizational EQ. It's only recently getting some press. They call it citizenship behavior, organizational citizenship behaviors. So how organizations function at an emotional level. So let's say that I buy 2 pens every day, okay? The first pen is a blue pen. I buy it from the same store, usually, it costs a little bit more than average. Costs about $1 each. I pull off the pen, the cap, it writes fine, lasts a long time. The cap fits on very nice and snug, has a lot of ink, always gives me the right level of ink, it's a perfect pen. I also buy a green pen. Now the green pen every day, sometimes a cap it doesn't fit very well, sometimes the cap doesn't fit at all. Sometimes I can't pull the cap off, just depends. Sometimes when I write, there's green ink. Sometimes there's no ink at all. Sometimes I find that the ink splotches on my paper. And in many cases, I find that the green pen sometimes just doesn't feel right. Okay, whereas the blue pen is always very reliable, gets me where I want to go. So I'm going to borrow this flip chart here. And I'm going to ask you, if I was to transport you into the working environment of the company that makes the blue pen, what would you see? Let's say I just magically transported everybody onto the factory floor of the company that makes the blue pen. What would you see? Is workspace, is it clean? Is it messy? Do you see, pardon?
It's perfect.
It's perfect. Okay, so we'll say perfect. Pardon?
Depends the standards.
Oh, they have standards. You see, they have processes. Very good. What else would you say about this work environment? Would it be clean? Would it be dirty? Would it be noisy? Quiet? What do you think? What would you see for the company that makes the perfect pen? Let's say this is the perfect pen. Clean. How about the people? Do you think the people, do they know what they're doing? Are they always running around trying to solve problems? What do you think? How nice would it be to work in a company that makes the perfect blue pen? Pardon?
Carefully, work carefully with this because it is a very good pen.
Okay, so they have a bit of, they have pride in the work. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, pride in the work.
Yes.
They're proud of their work.
Yes.
Okay. So now let's say that we suddenly transport ourselves to the company that made the green pen. Don't forget, the green pen is the one that sometimes you can't pull the cap off. Sometimes the ink doesn't work. And sometimes it's the wrong size. What would you see at the green pen company? If you walked up, would it be clean, tidy, messy? Very messy? Okay. Do you see a lot of work processes? Do they know what they're doing? Pardon? Unprofessional. Okay. And based on, this is a very good answer here. When you look at the blue and the green company, which company has people with the most experience? Okay, well, why is that? What do you think the blue company? They're more experienced because, well, people like to work at a blue company, right? Okay. So, pardon? They're smart here, yes. The smart people, that's true. We'll go back to what I said earlier. Sometimes you have smart people here too, but yeah, that's actually very good. We'll say the blue people here, they're more skilled. More skilled. Because like for instance, everybody here is probably very smart. I'd say you're all probably smarter than the average. I'm going to take a giant leap, but I assume that you're all probably smarter than the average person. But if I threw you into my environment, no matter how smart you are, you probably wouldn't be able to perform very well because you don't know my job. Same as if I went to your job and tried to do your job. I like to think I'm a little smarter than average, but if I went to your job, I wouldn't be able to perform very well because I'm not skilled in what you do. So there's a difference between skill and smarts. So going back to the green company, would the people there be proud of their work? Not so much?
Maybe there is a bad management.
Okay, so what do you mean by bad management? Are the managers... They're very controlling? Very good. Hesitant to change. That's very, very popular in a green company, by the way. Hesitant to change. Very good. Like this is the way, we've always made pens like this. Everyone buys our pens. Why should we change, right? There's a story about Toyota in the 1960s when they first introduced their first car in America. The car actually was quite underwhelming. It wasn't a very powerful car. It was, compared to the giant muscle cars in America, it was smaller, underpowered, but they were very reliable. And the Ford company especially said, the Japanese cars, the CEO actually said that the Japanese cars would last 1 year and they'd be gone. We'll never see them again. Because who wants this car? It's not as good as our car. But yet, there's a guy named Frank Hopp who was he was a district manager at a factory in California. He actually took this car apart and found out that each piece of that car was snapped to fit. And what snapped to fit is in engineering is it's like a puzzle. It's like the blue pen. If you put the cap on, it snaps to fit. Okay. Whereas in America, matter of fact, there's videos on YouTube if you want to see it, where you look at the assembly line in America. A lot of the parts need to be put together with hammers. They have giant hammers to put the pieces together. And this man's like, oh my God, these cars are really well made. So he called the CEO and all the big wigs in the White Castle in the sky, said, hey, we got a problem here. So they all flew into California. He said, look at this. They took this car, and if you've ever worked on cars, you'll find that if you take a car apart and you put it back together again, it doesn't go back together the same way. Okay, because you don't have a giant hammer at home to put it together again. But this man had the engineers take this Toyota car apart 12 times, and each time snapped to fit. And then they took a similar Ford car, and it was like a green. Sometimes the pieces wouldn't go together, sometimes they fell off, sometimes you needed a hammer. And the Ford executives looked at it and they said, wow. They began to laugh. And they said, the Japanese spend all this money making sure that all their parts fit together. That's a waste of money. Why do you want a blue pen when you can have a cheaper green pen? They actually said that, by the way. That's when they said that the Japanese cars will not last more than 1 year in the American market. Now look at it. So this is very good. These are all very good answers. So when you look at a Toyota and you look at, in my experience, there's a car called a Yugo when I was younger. Came out in the 1980s. And they were very cheap, but they weren't very well made. They were from the former Yugoslavia. They were known for falling apart as soon as you drove off the lot. They were that bad. So If you could tell the difference between a blue pen and a green pen company just by the product, how do you think customers pick cars? Do you think customers are willing to pay a little bit more for a blue pen? Probably, right? Yeah. So I spent a lot of my life studying these kinds of things. And it's very similar to your emotional quotient, in which companies or the people inside it develop this, we call it culture, but it's a hierarchy of different rules of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable in a company. Like, for instance, hesitance to change. Sometimes you don't change a thing because you're paid to make something. You're not paid to think. Okay? Taicchi Ohno, one of my heroes, he was the one that invented the Toyota production system. He said one time this American man asked him, "Why do people want to work at Toyota?" And he said, "People go to work to think." And that's all he said. So going back to your EQ, if you go to a place where you work, where you're encouraged to think, because in Toyota, all the processes are around letting the individual at the end solve the problems. Conversely, and I've actually seen this personally, if an engineer creates a problem, he's sent down to fix the problem. He doesn't tell, like Greenpen, this guy up here doesn't say, "Hey, you fixed my problem down here." Now, once again, Toyota may have changed. This is about 20 years ago, so I will assume it's the same. But people and it's funny because in America, Toyota also has factories there. And they thought, well, the American culture is a little bit different. But what they found is in America, they're exactly the same as far as like work productivity. As a matter of fact, the highest quality factory outside of Japan is in America. And they found the same thing. They asked the workers in America. They used to make green pens. They used to make Fords. And then Toyota came in because they were going to close the factory down. Toyota came in, kept the factory open, and trained them all how to make Toyotas. And they said, "What's the great thing about Toyota over Ford?" And they said, "They let me think. They let me, they're very strict, but they let me think. They let me solve my problems." So just thought I'd leave that with you. It's similar to what you had with EQ. So what wisdom do I have to share with everybody? That's very difficult because, as I said, I always find that there's people here that usually know more about the subjects I teach than I do. So I always like to listen. But within my context, what I've found in my career, I've spent most of my career in industry, in engineering. And only in the last 10 years or so have I been in academia. So what I've found is industry's solutions becomes society's problems. Okay, take for instance, right now we always hear about AI and automation and how this is going to improve productivity and it's going to make all this money for everybody and people won't have to work anymore. Okay, we hear about this frequently. Whenever I hear that, I am reminded of what I heard back when I was a child, when the information age started, where people would work 15 hours a day. We'd have all this money. Whoops, sorry about that. We'd have all this money and all this free time. So, which consequently resulted in all these bowling alleys and skating rinks being built all over America, because it was expected that when the information age fully came in and we'd have computers and everything, that we'd have so much free time that we wouldn't have to work anymore. Well, now we know what's happened, right? Did that actually occur? No, it hasn't. In America, and it's similar for other countries, Americans work more than they ever have. And their salaries have changed very little in the last 40 years. And I've talked to people from other industrialized countries, and it's very much the same. And what has happened is not so much that the information age is bad, it's just that it brings new problems to the forefront. Okay, like for instance, globalization has resulted in this huge shift of wealth from industrialized Western countries to other countries. And we are starting to see this shift from these countries to other countries because the money always goes to where it's cheapest. Okay, so progress is not always good. And we are at risk with AI and with automation of something very similar happening. We always hear about the successes, but we never hear about the failures. What are we going to do when AI takes over? They say that within 50 years, 80% of all jobs will be automated in the world. 80%. Okay? So, in a way, that's great. If everyone was going to be able to go out and have fun and enjoy life and, pursue their extrinsic and intrinsic needs, that's great. But that's not the way businesses work. We live in a business model, a global business model that chases the lowest costs. And as I tell people when I talk I know several people within the industry that love AI, and I say, well, there's two things about robots. Robots are very productive, and they don't complain. They don't want time off. They don't go home to their families. But robots don't pay taxes. And robots don't buy stuff either. So, unfortunately, that gets a little lost. I hear TED Talks all the time about how we shouldn't fear the robots. Don't fear AI. AI is your friend. But we never hear about the human side of the problems. And throughout history, we've seen technological changes that disrupt the way we work. When we look at the industrial age, when the UK came into the industrial age in about the 1790s, there were massive riots. And people died because people who had worked in factories their entire lives, suddenly they were without a job. Okay? And you could trace back every technological advance always has a disruption. So sometimes it's worth it. Sometimes these disruptions are good. But like, for instance, the automobile was praised at the time as the most important invention of our time because it took all those horses off the street. Well, look back now. 80 years later, well, was the car such a good invention? You could say yes. You could say no. It just depends, right? There's, like global warming. You can argue that climate change is a result of many technological advances impacting the Earth at once. Okay, so like for instance, I was at a conference a couple months ago where they were talking about, it's great. We can sell ships from Alaska to Russia, across the Arctic Circle now. Okay, well, that's great. I can get my stuff from China a little bit cheaper, but is it worth higher sea levels? If you're in business, yes. If you're a society, maybe not. So people ask me, well, why do I go to these conferences? Why do I care about this stuff? I care because throughout my career, I've seen decisions made in industry without any thinking about the people involved. And we see the results of these. We see, like Donald Trump. Okay, everyone knows who he is, right? Yes. Okay. Boris Johnson in the UK. You have all these different people, okay? They are elected. They're not flukes. They are the byproducts of all of these effects on society. It's society lashing back at these technological advances. And I love this group because the Social Sciences and Humanities. Okay, if anyone will understand the problems of social systems such as people, workers, the old, the elderly, the young, it's the people in this room. And I sincerely hope that we can all find something from this conference to take back to our part of the world. And perhaps now we're not going to solve cancer in one day, obviously. But what drives me is the fact that, when I work in industry, I always ask the question, hey, what about the people? I was in a discussion a couple years ago about, hey, we were able to make something 50% cheaper. Well, that means, what does that mean? Well, that means we can lapse more people because we don't need them anymore. We're more efficient. We are more productive. Productivity is great. I love productivity. When I lived in Japan, I had a very profound respect for productivity, but in Japan, once again, it may have changed. This is 20, 30 years ago. But in Japan, they always said, okay, well, when Mitsubishi, they had a plant on the coast, they went from steel to like making airplane parts. They improved the productivity, but nobody lost their job. Because in that culture, they felt that progress must involve the people as well. It's a systemic approach. And as I said, many times in industry, especially in America, decisions are made by industry without understanding that the people are part of the system also, as well. So I hope that I was able to share with you what drives me to come to these conferences and study social systems, and hopefully I can learn from you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.